You're 20 years old. 6 weeks ago, you were somewhere ordinary, a farm, a factory floor, a college classroom. And now you're crammed into a steel landing craft, soaked to the bone, watching the coast of France get closer through a wall of gray spray. This is the 6th of June, 1944. You don't know it yet, but historians will spend the next 100 years calling this the single largest seaborne invasion ever attempted. Over 150,000 men crossing the English Channel in one night, aimed at breaking open Adolf Hitler's fortified coastline and starting the long fight to free Western Europe. Right now, none of that matters to you. What matters is the next 600 yards of open beach in front of you, and whether you're going to make it across. This is what that day looked like, second by second, from the inside. Not the version in the textbooks, the version that happened to an ordinary 20-year-old in a landing craft at 20 minutes past 6 in the morning. 12 hours earlier, you're standing on a dock in southern England with a rifle slung over your shoulder and a letter in your pocket that you wrote 3 times before you got the wording right. You don't seal it yet. You're hoping you won't need to send it. Around you, thousands of men are doing the same thing you are, checking gear that's already been checked, going quiet in a way that wasn't there yesterday. Someone hands you coffee and a donut from a Red Cross stand, and it's such a strange, ordinary gesture that for a second you almost forget where you're about to go. A sergeant nearby is going over the plan again, even though everyone already has it memorized. Land, get off the beach, take the high ground above it. Simple, on paper. Men around you deal with the wading in different ways. Some go over their gear obsessively, checking straps and buckles that don't need checking. Some try to sleep, or at least pretend to, curled up against crates on the dockside with their helmets pulled low. A few play cards by lantern light, betting cigarettes and small change on hands nobody's really paying attention to. Every so often, someone cracks a joke that's funnier than it should be, purely because everyone's nerves are so close to the surface that anything at all can set off a laugh. It's not bravado exactly. It's just what young men do with fire when there's nowhere left to put it. You climb the netting up the side of a troop transport ship in the dark, and your boots slipping on wet rope, 60 pounds of gear pulling at your shoulders. Somewhere below, smaller landing craft are being lowered into water that's rougher than anyone briefed you to expect. This is the last calm you're going to get for a long time, and some part of you already knows it. The landing craft drops into the water with a jolt that throws half the men off their feet, and immediately you understand why so many soldiers describe this crossing as its own kind of ordeal, completely separate from what's waiting on the beach. The English Channel that night is brutal. 4-foot swells, freezing spray coming over the sides with every wave, a flat-bottomed boat pitching in a way it was never built to handle gracefully. Almost everyone around you is seasick within the first 20 minutes, including you. There's no dignity in it, and nobody expects any. You're packed shoulder to shoulder with 30 other young men, most of whom you've trained with for months, a few you barely know, all of you soaked, cold, and trying not to think too hard about the next hour. Somewhere out in the dark, the largest naval bombardment most of these men have ever witnessed is underway. Heavy guns from ships positioned offshore, firing over your heads toward the coast. The sound arriving as a series of deep, rolling shocks you feel in your chest before you consciously register them as noise. Nobody talks much. A few men pray. One kid near you keeps checking his rifle, even though he checked it 4 times already. The coast is still just a smudge of gray on the horizon, but it's getting less smudgy by the minute. At some point, the smudge stops being a smudge. You can make out a shoreline now. Sand, low bluffs behind it, and above the bluffs, if you look hard enough through the haze, the outline of concrete positions built specifically to stop men like you from getting off this beach alive. This coastline has a name in the official planning documents, but right now it's just the place you're about to run across. The ramp of your landing craft is still down at the front, and the coxswain steering the boat is fighting to hold a straight line through churning water and drifting smoke. Somewhere further down the beach, other landing craft are already unloading. And the sound reaching you now isn't naval gunfire anymore. It's smaller, sharper, closer. Machine gun fire striking the front of landing craft up and down the shoreline. A sound every man in your boat recognizes immediately, even though almost none of you have heard it in real combat before. Your sergeant is shouting something. You can't hear most of it over the engine and the surf and your own pulse, but you catch the last part. Stay low, keep moving, don't stop on the sand. Your hands are doing something with your rifle that your training put there automatically, because your conscious mind is mostly occupied with a single overwhelming thought. This is real. This is actually happening, and it's happening right now. The engine cuts back. The boat lurches to a stop in water that's shallower than deep, but far from the dry sand you were promised in the briefing. The ramp drops. What happens in the next 10 seconds is something almost nobody who lived through it could ever fully put into words afterward. And it's not because the memory faded, it's because the human mind isn't built to process that much information at once. Rounds are striking the ramp and the water around it. Men are moving forward because that's the order and because standing still is worse. Some make it past the ramp cleanly. Others don't get more than a few steps before they go down. And there's no time to process who or how, because the only thing that matters in this moment is reaching the sand. You're in the water now, and it's colder and deeper than you expected. Coming up past your waist, your gear dragging at you with every step. Somewhere to your left, an entire boat team from another company is being cut down almost as soon as they exit their landing craft. A devastating few minutes that historians will later describe as one of the costliest of the entire war for the men who lived through it. You don't know that statistic yet. You just know you need to keep moving, and that stopping to think is the one thing you absolutely cannot afford to do. The beach in front of you isn't the short sprint the maps made it look like. It's several hundred yards of open sand, obstacles, and no cover at all, with defensive positions on the bluffs above having a clear, unobstructed view of every single man crossing it. You move the way you were trained to move. Short bursts, then down, then up and moving again. Except now every choice about when to move and when to stay down is being made under fire. For real, for the first time in your life. The sand is churned up around you from artillery and mortar impacts, some fresh, some from the minutes before you arrived. Steel obstacles designed to rip open the hulls of landing craft still stand in rows across the tidal flat, some rigged with explosive charges, and you weave between them the way you rehearsed on a mock beach back in England. Except the mock beach never had rounds cracking past your ear. You pass men who are down and not moving, and you don't stop because you can't. Because there are men behind you counting on you to keep the advance going. And because your sergeant's voice from 20 minutes ago is still the loudest thing in your head, keep moving. Somewhere ahead, engineers and demolition teams are working under fire to blow gaps through the beach obstacles so that tanks and vehicles can eventually follow the infantry inland. Working in small exposed teams because the tide is already rising behind them, and every obstacle still standing when the water reaches it becomes invisible and lethal to the landing craft still on their way in. You don't see most of this happening. Your entire world right now is about 15 feet of sand directly in front of you. But it's happening all along this same stretch of coast. Hundreds of small, desperate, coordinated actions that will only make sense as one single event when historians piece it together decades later. You reach the base of the bluffs, and for the first time since the ramp dropped, there's something between you and the guns above. A shallow rise in the terrain. A stretch of low ground shielded from direct fire where the angle from the defensive positions can't quite reach. You're not safe. Nobody on this beach is safe. But for the first time in what felt like an hour and was actually closer to 20 minutes, you can stop, breathe, and take stock of who's around you. Some of the men who started this morning in your landing craft are here. Some aren't. Nobody says much about it yet. There isn't time, and there's a part of the mind that simply refuses to process it until later, and sometimes years later. Officers and NCOs are already working to reorganize scattered units into fighting groups, using whoever's nearby rather than whoever they were originally assigned, because the landing scattered almost everyone from their planned positions. Someone finds a gap in the beach defenses, a natural draw cutting up through the bluffs, and word starts moving down the line. This is the way up. This is how you get off this beach and start doing what you actually came here to do. By the time you reach the top of the bluffs, the battle for the beach behind you is still raging, but you're no longer part of it. You're moving inland now, into hedgerows and small French villages, into a different phase of a war that's going to keep going for almost another full year. The terrain changes almost immediately once you're past the bluffs. Thick hedgerows dividing the fields into small, enclosed pockets, each one a potential fight of its own, nothing like the open beach you just crossed. This is country nobody trained you for specifically, and it will define the fighting in this region for weeks to come, long after the beach itself has become a supply route rather than a battlefield. Somewhere behind you, more waves of men are still landing, still crossing that same beach, still facing what you just survived. Reinforcements, supplies, tanks, an entire invasion force is pouring onto this stretch of French coastline behind you. transforming a single, desperate morning into the beginning of a sustained campaign that will eventually reach all the way to Germany itself. You don't know any of that yet. Right now, you know that you're alive, that the men around you are mostly strangers pulled together by circumstance, and that somewhere behind you on that sand are friends who didn't make it this far. There will be more days like this one ahead of you. Some worse, a few slightly better, stretching out across months of fighting through French countryside, through towns whose names you've never heard of, toward an ending that's still a long way off. But this morning, this one specific morning, is the one that every man who survived it will carry for the rest of his life, whether he ever talks about it or not. Almost none of these men were professional soldiers. Most were ordinary young men, farmers, students, factory workers, thrown into the most violent morning most of them would ever experience. They crossed that beach not because they weren't afraid. Fear was the dominant emotion for nearly everyone, right up until the ramp dropped and training took over. What made the difference wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward anyway, because the alternative was letting the man next to you go it alone. Underneath all the planning, this was individual 20-year-olds making one impossible decision after another on a beach they'd never seen before. Decades later, survivors would describe the same contradiction. The day felt endless while it happened, yet collapsed in memory into a handful of vivid fragments. The ramp dropping, the cold of the water, a friend's voice calling out and then not calling out anymore. That's how memory holds on to something too large to process all at once. Not as a story, as fragments, replayed for a lifetime. If this kind of deep dive into history is what you're here for, subscribe. And let us know in the comments which other part of World War II you'd want covered next.